Good. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's EV Infrastructure Coordination Group Forum hosted by the Peninsula Regional Transportation Planning Organization, or PRTPO for short. I'm Thera Black, PRTPO coordinator, and I'll facilitate today's discussion. I have a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. First, I encourage you, if you don't mind, to add your organization after your name, if appropriate, on the participants list. That'll facilitate discussion and help people make new connections. If you go to your name under the participants list and right-click, you should be able to rename, just add a hyphen and your organization or acronym after your name. Second, if you would keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking, that'll help cut down the background noise for discussion and for our panelists. Also, we're recording today's forum, and a video of the forum will be uploaded to PRTPO's YouTube channel. And hopefully before the end of the week, I will be sending a link to everyone who's participating today, and is also the other folks who are on the EV infrastructure distribution list who couldn't be here, along with the slides from today's presentation and contact information for our presenters. And finally, PRTPO maintains an EV resources portal on our website at prtpo.org. We add content to that resource portal in response to input that we get from our members and stakeholders in an effort to support you in the work that you do. So please, if you are looking for information regarding, I think we've got up there EV plans, forecasting, business models, codes and ordinances, and funding sources, I think are the main categories we have up there. I encourage you to check out the website. And if you don't find what you're looking for, let me know. I'm not sure I can get my hands on it, but if I can, chances are there's someone else who needs that information as well. So before we do introductions, I'd like to recognize Beck Ashby. She's the Port Orchard City Council member, but more importantly, she's chair of the PRTPO. PRTPO supports greater EV readiness in the Peninsula region through its work program. Beck, would you like to say a few words?
Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone. It's nice to see a variety of stakeholders joining us. Many of our members are represented and many non-members are represented. So we're very pleased to continue education forums for our members and stakeholders who are working to provide safe, efficient mobility throughout our region and throughout the state. And today, as we all know, is about EV readiness and infrastructure. So again, I welcome you all. And I have a bit of housekeeping that Thera didn't mention, but as we have more people join us, if you turn your video off, then our presenters will be on the front page. And when you're speaking, turn your video on and your mute on. I don't know, Sarah, if that makes a difference to you. I find it much easier to facilitate a meeting when I can see my presenters up front. Anyway, again, thank you. I appreciate everyone attending and hope that we are providing information that's important to all of you.
Thank you, Beck. And those are good tips from Beck. Thank you for sharing that. So, so now we're going to do introductions, just because of the size of the group and the format in the video format. What I'm going to do is work through my participant list. And if this would be a great time when I call your name, if you flip on your camera and wave or whatever, that would be great. And hopefully I can do this without missing too many people. So, starting at my list, the top down, Larry Coppola with Port of Allen, Executive Director of Port of Allen. We have Susan Matthews, who is the new Tribal Transportation Planner for the Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe. Amy Asher, General Manager for Mason Transit. We have Andrew Nelson with Kitsap County Public Works. We have Angie Moser with the Port of South Whidbey. We have Arnie Backer with Port of Bremerton.
Morning, everybody.
We have Beck Ashby with Port Orchard City Council.
Just
Chris.
a second. Well, I was just going to say, I'm not as fast as everyone
Oh,
else.
sorry. And I should be paying, I'm trying to look at too many different screens here. I should be paying attention how fast I'm doing this. Chris Gruel with the Lower Elwha Clallam Tribe, Public Works Director. Chris Hartman with Port of Port Angeles. We have Cindy Jane with Jefferson County Port Townsend Climate Action Committee. We have Claire Ward with NOAA Net.
Everyone.
We have, oh, my list is changing. This is what happens to you, Beck. David Fort with Kitsap County Public Works. We have Gary Anderson with Port of Bremerton. We have Heather Bickford with Island County and IRTPO. She's the IRTPO planner, the equivalent for PRTPO for the island region. We have Jamie Brooke with Jefferson Transit. We have Jeff Allen, one of our presenters today, with Fourth Mobility. We have Jill Silver with the 10,000 Years Institute. We have John Bender with Jefferson Transit. We have John Morrow with City of Port Townsend. We have Catherine Wolf with Pacific Northwest National Labs. We have Kevin Galacci with Clallam Transit, and I should be identifying also our other PRTPO Executive Board members. Sorry about that along the way. Kevin is also a PRTPO Executive Board member. Kevin Chudy, Mason County Commissioner. Matt Egan, one of our presenters today with Chargepoint. We have Matt Paz with WSDOT Olympic Region. We have Melissa Moore with Kitsap County Public Works. We have Michael Bateman with City of Poulsbo. We have Mike Usen with DKS, who helped get us started on our EV ventures this past spring and has been helpful in getting this together. We have Rachel Anderson, City of Sequim City Council member and also another member of PRTPO. We have Randy Netherland, Vice Chair of PRTPO and a Mason County Commissioner. We have Shannon Walker, our third presenter today with Rivian. We have Sid Sridhar with Pacific Northwest National Labs. We have Susan Driver, SMD Solutions Consultant and a transportation planner, and led the EV planning effort for the island region. Ted Jackson, Port of Allen Commissioner and another PRTPO Executive Board member. We have Tom Ingle with Local 2020. We have Vicki Cummings with the Executive Director of the Grays Harbor Council of Governments and a veteran of the previous prior ZVIP effort, the EVIP effort. We have Wendy Clark Gatson with the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe. We have Xana Dennis, also with the Grays Harbor Council of Governments. And for those who don't know about regional planning groups, that is the neighbor to the Peninsula region just to the south. And I have probably missed some people. Who have I missed? Because I think some other folks came in and I probably missed them on my list. Did I miss anybody? Oh, I see. Did I get you, Melissa? Melissa Shoemaker? Melissa Schumacher from Kitsap County. So, and I apologize for anybody else that I missed. But if you did sign in late, if you don't mind, if you would, on the participants list, if you hover over your name, if you would rename and add your organization after you, it'll help everybody know who all's on the call. I think most of you did that. That's how I was able to know how many or who all you were with. So thank you for doing that. to get started here, what I want to say is that, excuse me here. Sorry, let's get back in my organization thing. So today we have three panelists who are going to help us understand the world of EV infrastructure from the vantage point of charging equipment vendors and the organizations that develop and manage grant-funded projects. This is a chance for all of us to get a little smarter about the role these kinds of entities play in successful project development and deployment and what they can bring to any EV partnership project. We'll hear from Shannon Walker with Rivian and Matt Egan with Chargepoint, how EV charging companies approach project development, the kinds of decisions that have to be made about charging equipment procurement, ownership, and maintenance, and other factors that are going to influence your equipment decisions and partnership opportunities. We'll also learn about their very different companies. They have two very different structures, and we'll get insights that will be applicable to working with them or any EV charging vendor. Then we'll hear from Jeff Allen, Executive Director of Fourth Mobility, how multiple facility needs from an array of partners come together into a single project package, and how these multifaceted projects are managed. I'll say, as I've been learning this, I'm starting to think of this role as the glue that holds the individual pieces into a single comprehensive project package that sort of creates its own economy of scale. So it'll be good to hear how electromobility partners like Fourth approach infrastructure opportunities like we're looking at in the Peninsula region. And then finally, we're going to talk about how the pieces all come together into a proposal, whether it's a big ZVIP grant project or any number of the smaller projects that I think several of you are contemplating. EV infrastructure projects are different from traditional transportation projects when it comes to project development, procurement, and administration. So I'm hoping that you've been looking at some project ideas and have specific questions that Shannon, Matt, Jeff, or others on this coordination group can help answer. So please pop questions that you have into the chat box as they arise. We'll probably be able to field some of them as we go along the way, but we'll also have time for Q&A in each section for other questions and pop-up ideas as they occur. And if there's anything that we can't get to today, I'll try to get responses to you afterwards. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon and Matt to kick us off. Shannon is the Northwest Partnership Development Manager for Rivian, and Shannon Walker, and Matt Egan is the Northwest Public Sector Sales Manager for Chargepoint. You'll hear a little bit more about both of them. Thank you both for joining us today. And we did not finalize this, but I'm going to say, Shannon, do you want to kick us off here this morning?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Give me one moment to share my screen. Awesome. And then, can you all see my slides? Fantastic. Let me just make sure I don't have any distractions. There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Again, my name is Shannon Walker, and I am a Senior Partnership Development Manager at Rivian. I specifically focus on the Northwest. I live in Washington, and I am a Partnership Development Manager for the Waypoints Charging Network. Oops. Let's go. There we go. A quick overview of what I'll be covering today. I'll share a bit about Rivian and a bit about the Waypoints Charging Network, including information about our charging solutions, software, and worry-free services. I hear some. Okay. Rivian is a company that is driven by its mission, which is to keep the world adventurous forever. And we know that this requires a deep and urgent shift of our transportation system's fueling away from fossil fuels and towards clean and renewable electricity. We know that electric vehicles are a key component of this shift, and Rivian is a manufacturer of an all-electric truck, SUV, and delivery van. We also know that this shift requires supportive energy solutions, including EV charging infrastructure, which is where the work of my team comes in. Rivian was founded in 2009. We currently have over 7,000 employees across the globe, and we have a goal to achieve carbon neutrality across the entire business line by 2028. Rivian manufactures electric vehicles that provide a more responsible way to explore our planet. Here we have the R1S and R1T. These are the all-electric SUV and truck. They have a rated over 300-mile range and plenty of room for people and gear to support that all-electric adventure, including towing capacity and off-road capability. We also have the RPV, which is an all-electric delivery, all-electric delivery van manufactured for Amazon. Awesome. Rivian is deploying a Waypoints network of 10,000 level 2 EV chargers across the US and Canada by 2023. These will be installed where people shop, play, stay, and eat to fill EV charging gaps and meet demands of not just Rivian vehicles, but of all electric vehicles. Rivian is focused on providing a seamless and intuitive customer experience across all lines of the business. And for the Waypoints, for the Waypoints network, this means that we're focused on providing a seamless and intuitive customer experience for the EV driver, the site host, and for other customers or partners who may be involved in Waypoints deployments, such as the electric utility. The Waypoints network program is divided into 3 sub-programs, and these sub-programs work collaboratively together to fill EV charging gaps. I am particularly part of the Parks program, but again, I work very closely with the outbound and inbound program. The Parks program is focused on partnerships to fill EV charging gaps in parks and outdoor areas, and in partnership with public agencies. We also work with, for example, state parks, national parks, municipalities and utilities, and regional government agencies. Outbound and inbound, the other 2 sub-programs of Waypoints, are differentiated by the key difference that they aim to work with private site hosts. So on the outbound side, those partnerships are focused on large national corporations, for example, or real estate investors, the kind of larger scale partnerships. And then we also have inbound, which is the smaller scale partnerships, such as independent businesses, family-run enterprises, and destinations. The Waypoints Parks program aims to enable EVs as the preferred mode of transportation for outdoor recreation. And this is to ultimately protect our most treasured resource, the natural environment. We are building partnerships to provide universal level 2 coverage within parks and outdoor areas. And this includes national parks, state parks, and other public recreation areas. I wanted to highlight 2 recently announced partnerships. One is with Tennessee State Parks, where we're deploying Waypoints across state parks in Tennessee. And then the second is with the Nature Conservancy, which includes a component of deploying Waypoints at select Nature Conservancy preserves. Here are the Rivian Waypoints hardware examples. So we have a wall-mounted Waypoints charger, a single pedestal Waypoints charger, and a dual pedestal Waypoints charger. And this is a bit more about the key features of the Waypoints infrastructure. It has a max charge speed of 11.5 kilowatts, which is on the faster end of level 2 charging. These chargers are also designed to be open to all EV drivers. And on that note, we, for example, use the standard J1772 plug and are also designing stations that are plug-in charge compatible. The stations are networked and connected to enable over-the-air firmware updates via Ethernet, cellular, or Wi-Fi. And site hosts can remotely view and control settings for the stations via an online portal, which we call the Rivian Energy Cloud. On the stations themselves, there's a screen which displays time of sale information and communicates user-friendly information such as price and charging status. And there's also a mobile app for EV drivers that provides charger location, real-time charging updates, and payment details to the drivers. Rivian chargers are networked chargers, and they're supported by Rivian's software solutions. We built an app to enhance the driver's journey, and through the app, EV drivers have the ability to add a payment method, find nearby charging stations, view charging prices, and track the progress of their session and complete payments. As I mentioned, there's also an LCD screen on the Waypoints chargers that allows them to view charging fees, session progress, and view once their session is complete. Here's an example on the slide, and these numbers are just examples. And then on the back end, there's a site host dashboard where site hosts can choose to manage their waypoints. And this allows them to, for example, push pricing, review total sessions, energy consumed, and the status of those sessions. Again, customer experience is a top priority at Rivian, and we offer worry-free installation where we manage all aspects of the installation process in-house, including engineering and design, project management, construction management, hardware and materials, station commissioning, and site validation. And this provides a single point of contact across the installation process. We also offer a comprehensive maintenance plan for host managed stations, which includes an extended warranty on parts, coverage of labor to repair warranty related malfunctions, yearly coverage of one repair due to accidental damage, and we include the first year of this service for free in individual site sales. This is just a quick visual representation of how Rivian's worry-free installation offers a single point of contact through the entire installation process, again, to enable that seamless and intuitive customer experience. In closing, I'd just like to thank you for inviting us here today to share more about Rivian, our Waypoints program, and our ongoing efforts to keep the world adventurous forever. We're very excited to join the conversation about building the EV charging infrastructure network throughout the Olympic and Kitsap Peninsulas, and welcome the opportunity to explore future partnership with your organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. So we're going to hear from Matt, and then we'll have some joint session time for questions and answers. So Matt, tell us about yourself and tell us about Chargepoint, please.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for inviting me today. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Egan. I'm with Chargepoint, and I am based here in Seattle, Washington, and I am the account executive for the Pacific Northwest. So I'm really excited to talk to you all today about Chargepoint, kind of who we are, how we fit into the conversation here. Let me share my screen, make sure you all can see it. Share screen. Okay, can everyone see my presentation? Hoping that's a yes. So I think it goes kind of without saying it based on, what we're seeing in the news today. Sarah just told me today we saw Hertz ordered 100,000 Teslas, and the news continues to pick up that no industry is going to change more than transportation in the next 2 decades. We see that by 2040, we think that more than half of the light duty vehicle market is going to be electric. And I think this is from 2018, that number continues to tick up. Every major auto manufacturer, obviously the Teslas of the world and Rivians, Shannon is with Rivian, but then, GM, Volvo, Ford, all these companies are really committing fully to electrification of their vehicles as well. And so we're, really excited about that transition and think that, we'd love to support you all in that transition as well. So, who is Chargepoint? Chargepoint is an EV charging manufacturer and network provider. That is all we do. We make charging stations and charging station software and warranty products for those stations. So we're the world's largest EV charging network with over 160,000 ChargePoint specific ports worldwide and 160,000 roaming ports from our partners. So over 300,000 ports that are accessible through our network. We were founded in 2007, so we've been doing charging stations for 14 years now. We're headquartered down in California, and we have about 1,000 employees now worldwide. So as I mentioned, ChargePoint focuses on charging stations. We have a portfolio of charging stations, everything from residential charger at your home, which I'm not going to talk about today, level 2 commercial charging, and all the way up to DC fast charging. So the way to think about charging stations is, in our head, level 2 and level 3, or AC and DC. So we have products to support both of that. We have 2 level 2 products, a fleet and a multifamily, more private use product, a level 2 public use station, and then level 3 fast charging, which I think is a really exciting application here specifically for corridor funding throughout the peninsula. So getting into our different product offerings, I think the public facing options are really what make the most sense for this application. Our Ct4000 Station is a public facing level 2, meaning AC charger. When you think about level 2 charging, it's 7.2 kilowatts. Think about 25 miles of range added to a vehicle per hour. It's going to vary depending on the vehicle you have, the voltage, but generally speaking, a bit of a slower charge, but it's good for topping off your charging, charging for 1-2 hours at a local shop, a park, and filling up kind of throughout your day-to-day activities. So our station, the Ct4000, comes with an LCD screen, cord management built in. That means the cords are never dragging on the ground and it always kind of has a clean look to it. 4G connected, so contactless payment via credit card or mobile app, and is a really robust station designed to last about 10 years and is the best-selling level 2 station in the market today. And then I think for the bit more, the bigger and more exciting stuff, in my opinion, is the Chargepoint Express 250. This is our level 3 fast charger. So this is better used for corridors, for fast charging anywhere. Think of it as a not a replacement to, but kind of similar to a gas station model where you're on a road trip, you need to continue on your way, and this is going to fill up your car, much faster, more in the 20 to 30 minute, maybe an hour range. So when you're thinking about this is 480 volt power, it's 100 amps, and it's a really more robust, larger power output product. Similar in a lot of ways to level 2, has an LCD screen capable of accepting and receiving payments from customers, cable arms that always stay overhead, never dragging on the ground. And with these stations, a single station you see here is 62.5 kilowatts. But we actually have the ability to electrically pair those stations underground. So if you buy 2 stations, you're able to double the output on that to 125 kilowatts. So 125 is really what we're seeing folks look into, and certainly support corridor type charging into the future here. And then for the most robust of our offerings is the Chargepoint Express Plus. This is a bit on the, let's say, frankly, more expensive and in the higher output side of things. But this is where you're getting into the 350 kilowatt and looking into the future 500 kilowatt applications for more heavy duty charging, for commercial vehicles, for light trucks, light duty trucks. This is on the 350 kilowatt to 500 kilowatt output, can support up to 16 vehicles in a modular design. So you continue to add these stations for as many as you need. And again, we see this really carrying us kind of into the future, for high power charging. So with all of our stations, as I mentioned, we are a hardware and a software company. ChargePoint really is based on our software platform that we design, that provides customers the ability to do things like set price, set access. Who can use these stations, what time of day can they use it, how much do they pay, and all that decisions ends up coming down to the station owner. So we allow the station owner, who may or may not be you, to use this software platform. You get access into our network dashboard. You can see where your station is, how much energy is being dispensed, how much, any reporting features like energy, greenhouse gas savings, revenue on your stations, and ultimately set and receive pricing from those. So you can set a price for a certain amount of dollars per kilowatt hour, and that would all return back to you. And then really a lot of this has been designed with the driver experience in mind. So ChargePoint is really focused on, you not only do you want to install a station, but you want people to use it. You want drivers to have a good experience. So we have a really, strong home product that a lot of residential customers have, and then they use our app. That app is a really user-friendly design. It has over 6,000 reviews. You can take a look on the App Store. I find it easy to use, and you can plug it into your Apple CarPlay, Google CarPlay, and navigate to the station. You can see the price. You can see if it's available. You can see how much power it would be dispensing, and you can pay right through the app. No need to, use a credit card or call a number. It's all kind of one seamless experience for the drivers. There's a lot of other features that I, would love to talk about with our software that I think is exciting is power management, meaning the ability for you, to essentially oversubscribe the stations for the power infrastructure. So let's say you were to install a transformer today, but you don't know how many stations you need into the future. With software, with dynamic power management, you can essentially put more chargers on that network, on that transformer than normally would be allowed, and help you plan for the future. That way, if you don't know how many chargers you need today, you can put some in now and then use the software for the future to power manage that. So ChargePoint's model, to kind of speak to how you go about procuring it, ChargePoint allows the station owner to kind of control their own destiny, and allows them, you would ultimately be, let me stop sharing my screen. You would ultimately be purchasing the station, purchasing the software, and a kind of a hands-free operation and maintenance warranty package as well. Those are all available for purchase, and we also have a subscription model where it's a bundled package and an annual basis where you essentially are paying a subscription annually at a lower cost as opposed to purchasing it outright. So happy to dive in there. I think I hit my 10 minutes, maybe 1 minute over, but hopefully, gave you a quick intro into who ChargePoint is, and would be happy to open it up for some questions and talking about, who we are and how we operate.
Sorry, I'm sort of klutzy with my mouse here this morning. Thank you very much, Matt and Shannon both. There are a few questions bubbling up in the chat box here. I'll say, just to kick it off, I'm kind of curious, you two offer very different business models. One is more of generally sort of oriented towards we're gonna, as the company, we're gonna provide you, the station owner, we're gonna provide the facilities, but we're gonna maintain those for you over time. We'll sort of own them, and you'll sort of use these facilities, but you don't have to be too responsible for them. But, and then the other one is, but you'll pay for that. You'll pay for that service over time. And then the other business model seems to be more of a, you're gonna buy this product from us, and it's your product going forward. And we can provide you support and all, but it's yours. And I'm wondering if, in your experience, are there certain types of settings or applications where one of those business models tends to be the logical business model? I'm thinking about for public agencies that aren't typically in the business of providing energy, fueling stations. How should they think about the trade-offs between outright owning their charging facility versus leasing or sharing in the management of that?
Hey, I can go first with a few thoughts from the Rivian perspective. So first, I would say our approach to partnership is extremely flexible. We really work with site hosts from the get-go to understand goals, constraints, and then structure an individualized partnership around that conversations and kind of the needs and goals that bubble up there. And so with that, we, in that conversation, dig very deeply into some of those variables that you mentioned there. And so just, one example is during partnership development conversation, we would definitely discuss the desired level of ongoing engagement for the site hosts, which is related to the resources that site host may have available for ongoing management. Maybe a larger municipality might want and have the staff to do more of a hands-on approach for the charging stations. And so we would really dig into those desires to structure a partnership around that and a variety of other variables to make the partnership successful.
Yeah, I think from the charge point, to answer the question there, I think it really depends on what that muni or that owner is looking for. It's completely the trade-offs, I suppose, right? With ChargePoint's model, the owner would either purchase it outright and own it as an asset. Think of it as a new washing and drying machine or solar panels that you decide to purchase and own, and then you can use it as a benefit for your community, your customers, generate some revenue off of it, meaning you set whatever price you want and then can get recurring revenues. We also have that subscription model. I wouldn't call it a lease because leasing kind of means you pay it off and you own it at the end. You can still pay us annually for all those services, collect revenues, still set what price you want, set who can use it, but pay us annually instead of upfront. And I think it comes down to a lot of things. I think obviously cost being one of them. What is your budget? What is your expected amount you're willing to kind of commit upfront to it? And then what is the use case? Who's going to be using these? Is it going to be, do you want to charge money on it? Do you want it to be used by anyone, specifically for your employees or for specific customers, or for, the general public at large? That kind of all plays into it, as well as funding opportunities, right? So different funding opportunities have different requirements for ownership and operation of the station, who owns it and who doesn't. So those are all things to take into account when you're kind of thinking about the ownership model and the business model for EV charging.
And how should they think about like depreciation? Do these things last? Should they, if they're thinking about owning it, is it something that would be an investment that's good for 5 years? Or I don't even know what the life expectancy of these things are. Or is the technology changing so fast that that's more of the replacement factor as the technology advances?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our stations are designed to last 10 years, and they would certainly work for that period of time. And the good news is you put the infrastructure in, putting the panel and the circuit breaker in place, you're going to be able to put a station there at some point in the future regardless. So that's kind of a question we get a lot, though. I have the iPhone 10, but I bought the iPhone 13, and what about the 16 that comes out? Same with charging stations. So that's why I think ChargePoint specifically offered that subscription model that is a 3 or 5 year term. At the end of that term, there's a newer model you don't want your station to be obsolete, we can replace it. So that's something to consider as well. But as far as it lasting long enough, it's designed to last 10 years, and then certainly in 10 years we expect technology to be improving and changing at that point.
Yeah, and I would just add kind of to both questions that the specific grant opportunity and the granting agency have a lot of important information that would help answer these questions as well. Some granting agencies, for example, may have guidance on depreciation already for charging infrastructure, and definitely set guidance around match and things like that. So again, when we approach these kinds of opportunities, it's really about understanding the agency, the opportunity from like the granting agency perspective, as well as the site host and the charging needs associated, kind of putting those all together into a successful partnership.
Yeah. How about, I'm looking at the questions that have popped up in the chat, and I think it's really more of a question about the level 2 chargers delivering, if it's about a 40-mile range and an hour of charging, what does that mean for like an area renowned for its outdoor recreation opportunities? And does that have anything to do with how we think about spacing these charging facilities around, around the Olympic and Kitsap Peninsulas? Or, what are your thoughts about the role of level 2 chargers in highly rural outdoor active transportation settings?
Sure. So Rivian is developing the Waypoints level 2 network, and that question is on point, that there are certain locations and use cases that really make sense for level 2, and that's what we're focusing on. So for example, places with longer dwell times where people will be parking at a trailhead and then hiking for a few hours, or at a campground and plugging in and then sleeping at the campground, and cases like that. There are many situations where level 2 makes a lot of sense. It's just figuring out how, exactly where those places are. And I didn't mention this in my presentation, but Rivian is also deploying the Rivian Adventure Network, which is the DC fast charging network. And those stations are exclusive to Rivian vehicles, but they're kind of complementary in that there is a need for kind of the faster corridor charging, and then there's also opportunities where vehicles can be plugging in for longer periods of time where level 2 really makes sense.
Yeah. Any final thoughts from you, Matt, and before we move on?
Yeah, I think, speaking to that question specifically, I think it's the charging infrastructure is going to be a mix of everything, right? I mean, level 2 makes sense in some instances, level 3 makes sense in some instances, and I think one thing to think about is driver behavior for EV drivers is a bit different than gas, right? I think gas, you think about your gas vehicle, you drive to a gas station, fill it all the way up, wait till it's empty, and fill all the way back up again. EV drivers are a bit conditioned differently to, if they see a charger, they're going to fill it up from 75% to 100%. So that's where level 2 would make sense. And then level 3 is more for, I have no ability to get to a level 2 charger, either to home or to I need to fill up quickly. So it just depends on different applications. I think there was another question here. Do you work with electric utilities to identify best locations for chargers, electrically speaking? Can I address that one as well, potentially? Yeah, so certainly, right? Electric utilities are some of our largest customers, and they are very, I think there are probably some utilities on here as well. They're very excited and interested in EV charging, in their territory, both to sell more electrons and to potentially own and operate as an asset. So certainly, right? We think that we work with utilities all the time to make sure that your site is ready for EV charging. I think that level 2, the 240 volt, is a bit of a less of a major hurdle. 240 volt is what most of your buildings already have coming to it. Think of it as a dryer circuit, like the same circuit used for a washing or drying machine is what an EV charger would need for a level 2. So it's not a huge monumental task, but if you want a lot of them, then yeah, we gotta get the utility involved. I think level 3 is where really you need some coordination for 480 volt power. That is a higher transmission voltage. That's something that's not common at every building. And typically you're going to need to either find out where 480 volt is in their territory to make it easier, or get an upgrade at your site. So there's a lot of things that go into site selection, not only the parking lot and where is it physically, is it at a restaurant or a movie theater or whatever, but where's the power? And especially level 3 fast charging, you're going to need a large amount of power. So 480 volt and 100 amps per level 3 charger.
I'm starting to think that we need to have one of these with our utility partners, just to understand, for those of us who don't do utilities, how that whole process works for them, so we can be better partners there too. So, well, thank you both. We're going to come back. You're going to jump back into this in a little bit with us here. But for right now, we're going to switch our focus from that of sort of the EV charging vendor to that of, there's got to be a better term for this, but I'm thinking of as the project consolidator, or the glue that assembles so many disparate elements. You know, if you can imagine all these different charging facilities and needs and sites and partners, somehow pulls all that together into a single comprehensive project proposal. Jeff is the executive director of Fourth Mobility, and he will help us, try to help us understand what it takes to develop and manage an EV infrastructure project, whether we're talking a big multi-site project like a ZVIT proposal, or even just a simple 2-unit level 2 charger on a single site. I mean, there's some factors we have to think about. So thank you for joining us today, Jeff, and take it away.
First, I just need to figure out how to unmute. You'd think we'd have that, be able to do that in our sleep by now. Hi, great to be with you all today. My name is Jeff Allen. I'm executive director of Fourth, and small correction. That is, our name is just Fourth, but our website and social media handles are Fourth Mobility. So we get that a lot. But our website is fourthmobility.org if you want to follow, if you want to dig in more. So I just want to talk a little bit about who we are, give you some backup a little bit, give you some general kind of 40,000 foot advice, and then talk a little bit about how we might be able to help as you dig into this more. And I think that, let's see if I can do this. Yeah, so I'll try to be, this is not too much of an infomercial, but we are a nonprofit, mission-driven organization. We have about 30 staff people based here, mostly in Portland, although we have one up in Seattle and one in California, and it doesn't really matter anymore where people are, right? But we also are both a traditional C3 charity and a trade association with over 150 members across the entire transportation electrification ecosystem. So charging companies, electric utilities, car companies, bike, scooter, rideshare companies, NGOs, local governments. So really that entire ecosystem. It's two partnered nonprofit organizations. And we do really, I like the way you put it, we're trying to provide that connective tissue to move transportation electrification forward, which requires people to work together in new and different ways they're not used to working together. So what do? We have kind of 3 different major verticals, if you will. One is that connective tissue role of convening and education and promotion of best practices. We have a free email newsletter that goes to about 13,000 people that I'd encourage you to sign up for. We have free webinars a couple times a month. In fact, there's one happening right now on how do you avoid gentrification when you're installing charging. Those are all free, recorded, available on our website. We put on a major conference in November called the E-Mobility Equity Conference, which is also free for government staff. And we put on the Roadmap Conference in June, which is a face-to-face event, or will be again next year, which is really the leading electric mobility conference in the country. And it's right down here in Portland. So I encourage you to come down for that if you really want a deep dive. So we do a lot of those things. We also do policy advocacy and lobbying, help to reestablish the sales tax exemption for electric vehicles in Washington State, for example. We're involved in discussions around the Clean Fuels program up there and how that's going to be structured. Those kinds of things. Also working a lot right now at the DC level, but please don't ask me what's going to happen with the federal infrastructure bill. I'll tell you in a few months. And then the third big area is hands-on demonstration projects and programs. And this is kind of what sets us apart from a lot of nonprofits, is that we actually do demonstration projects to figure out how to make these things work in the real world. The picture on this slide is from a low-income electric vehicle car sharing project that we did up in Northeast Portland several years ago. We have a next iteration of that car sharing project happening in Hood River, Oregon right now. We've done everything from low-income EV car sharing to we're currently incubating another nonprofit that provides bike share and micromobility services to cities called Cascadia Mobility. We're doing projects around electric tractors, electric school buses, really trying to bring these stakeholders together and figure out how do you get them to work together, because utilities, transportation planners, car companies, not necessarily used to partnering in these ways. We also do a lot of outreach and education programs. We have behind me on my fake background, you see our downtown Portland brand neutral electric car showroom, for example. And then, and relevant to today's conversation, we've managed charging installation programs. We managed a project under EVIP last round. We managed a project for the state of Oregon's tourism department to put chargers at tourist destinations a few years back. We've also done a lot of work for governments on strategy of, with limited resources, what's the role of government in charging. Most notably, we worked with the Oregon Department of Transportation to put out a study called TINA, the Transportation Electrification Infrastructure Needs Analysis. It's a mouthful. That just came out recently. Next week, we're going to be releasing a report over in Scotland that we did for an international consortium of governments on what the appropriate role for government is more generally. And we've also done a lot of work to encourage workplaces to provide charging for their employees as part of transportation demand management and trip reduction and commute programs. And also for apartment buildings, we're developing some best practices with US DOE funding for apartment building managers. And then the last thing I'll say is that in all of our work, we have increasingly strong equity focus. We've really believe deeply that if you design programs and projects around folks who've historically faced the most barriers, you get better programs and better results. So, so general advice, couple of things. First of all, I'd encourage you to back up and make sure you're focusing on mobility needs. So charging by itself doesn't do anything for anyone, right? It's kind of like building a bike lane someplace where there's nowhere to bike to and no one has a bike. The bun reference here, we wrote a piece a few years back. People always talk about chicken and egg with, is it charging first? Is the cars first? Which I think is a terrible analogy. It's really more like an electric car is a hot dog. You can enjoy it perfectly well without public charging network, but it works so much better when you have the bun of the charging network, and then you can add mustard and ketchup and all these other things and not make a big mess in your hand. But the point is, if you're going to install charging, you want to know what is the mobility need you're meeting? What is the service that's going to enable? How is it going to be used? You want to make sure it is going to be used, because nobody wants charging to be installed someplace and then no one ever uses it. It's a waste of money and time. It's frankly, not good for any of us politically when people see those chargers sitting there collecting cobwebs. Second is think about what are those key, and before I leave that, a lot of ways to do that. Ideally, I would say if you're going to install charging, get some electric vehicles. If you're a public agency, get some electric vehicles so that you know you're going to be using it at the very least. That will also make you more familiar with it and what the challenges are. You can also do things like host a ride and drive event or some other kind of activation activities around it. Think about what those use cases are as you're thinking about charging. So who's going to use this and what are they going to need and how are they going to use it? Y'all were asking some great questions earlier along these lines about, if someone is coming to this park, are they going to need charging? And if so, what kind, for how long? Is it, a case where they're coming to the park and they just need to charge up the 30 or 40 miles that'll get them back out of the park to the nearest fast charger or back home? If you have a park that's right near an urban area where there already is a fast charger, they may not need a charger at all. So maybe you want to prioritize a different location. Fast charging, which I know is the focus for EVIP, you really want to focus on, yes, corridors and rural areas that people can't get to or can't travel easily without fast charging, but also think about urban areas. The highest demand on fast chargers are gig drivers and commercial drivers. People who drive for Uber and Lyft may very well use that fast charger 3 times a day. So if you have an opportunity to put in fast charging, think about, can you serve the corridor, but also have it be located someplace where people who are doing that kind of work can access it and can use it, because that can be a third or more of the total use on that fast charger. Think about partnering and scaling. So again, it takes a village to electrify transportation. So you really want to have partners. Back to the earlier point, you absolutely want to be talking to your local electric utility, but also thinking about partners, again, like who are those organizations that might have electric vehicles or might want access to electric vehicles? Could be workplaces, could be affordable housing providers, could be other government agencies. And I would say go a little bigger. It doesn't take that much more effort to think about comprehensively, let's bring in some electric vehicles for our fleet, put in charging for them that would also be available to the public, than it does to just slap a couple of level 2s someplace and hope for the best. And the results will be much, much better. And if you're going after grant funding, it will tell a much more compelling story as well. Sometimes it's better to have a bigger project and ask for more. And then the last thing I would say is you want to future-proof to the extent you can, or at least future resistant your project. So very simple example of that is putting in extra conduit, extra pipe. If you're often the most expensive part of charging is ripping up the concrete. So at the very least, put in that plastic pipe so that you won't have to come back and rip up the concrete again. But beyond that, really think about the goal here is that in 10 years, we're not selling gas cars anymore, which means in 15 or 20 years, half the fleet or more than half the fleet is electric. So start thinking about where are they going to charge, and let's work backwards with that end in mind. Whoop, sorry. Really quickly, some ways that we can help. And again, we're a mission-driven nonprofit, so we want to be helpful. We give away as much of the help as we can. We have a lot of material on our website, including an EV 101 flyer that's now in 10 languages, Charging 101 flyer, these events that I mentioned. We make as many of them free as possible. We can help with general advice and introductions, whether it's to charging companies, utilities, stakeholders, other funding resources. I dropped into the chat a link to a US DOT publication they put out a while back about existing federal money that can be used for charging, for example. And then if you are interested in working with us more deeply, some of the things that we could do include helping to activate that charging. In addition to hosting ride and drive events, we now have a mobile version of this showroom that's in a toy trailer we've converted and is hauled by an F-150 hybrid right now. Hope to replace it with an electric F-150 or a Rivian, hint, hint, as soon as possible. But we could bring that to your community, do some events, and really get people excited about the charging. We have projects that provide and place electric vehicles at the charging that can be rented by the hour by residents in the community using their phones. This is a great way if you want to have a vehicle hosted there that's available for sort of self-serve ride and drives. and also guarantee that the charging is used. You can also have a vehicle that you use for your own purposes, but when you're not using it, it's available for folks to rent for that purpose. We can also help with proposal development, drafting, and project management. As I say on that, my understanding of EVIP is that Washington state law does not allow private companies to apply for these grants. It has to come from a public agency. Many of you are public agencies, but if you don't want to do the application yourself, or if you want to put a bigger project together that covers a lot of different jurisdictions, that sort of concierge shepherding of all the stakeholders, figuring out how do you assemble, match, who can put what kind of in-kind or cash support into the kitty, that is definitely work that we do and have done for EVIP and for other grant funding. And those are all things that we would have to figure out how we get paid for. But again, we are nonprofit. We work pretty affordably. And with that, I'll just add our contact information here, and we'll make these slides available afterwards if folks want to follow up with us.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff. Good overview. You've worked with a lot of communities. I'm curious, I felt like what you were providing in the way of guidance or best practices or tips probably is born of experience. What are some common either misperceptions or like missteps that you find communities do when they're very first starting out, just because they don't have that experience? When they're jumping into EV infrastructure for the first time, especially, well, I was going to say especially public facing, but maybe this is both sides, both public and agency wise.
Oh gosh. How much time do we have? No, I think I really liked something you were saying before, that it's, well, for one thing, it's that often folks think about charging as a kind of a public works project. Like, we're going to go install some hardware. Like, you might think about, we're going to put in a new intersection or a new traffic signal. And I would say, think of it much more like a program. It's much more like a transportation demand management program, or a trip production program, or a bicycle and pedestrian program. If you're trying to encourage cycling, building bike lanes is part of it, but you wouldn't just go out and build some bike lanes and hope people use them, right? There's a whole program that wraps around that. So that's one thing. And then as you do that, you inevitably will need to talk to people, right? Engage with partners, and partners you might not normally engage with. And part of what we're seeing right now as this electrification scales up is when money starts to flow from the federal government for charging infrastructure, it is naturally going to flow mostly through DOT and through state DOTs and through MPOs and city transportation agencies, almost none of whom have been doing this, right? So it's going to be a steep learning curve to learn how do we use that public money efficiently, and it's going to take some very different partnerships with other folks. And then I guess the last thing I'll say, just in interests of time, is just to repeat, not thinking through the use cases and the future trends. So often you'll see folks, again, just install something from the best of intentions, but not necessarily think through how is it going to be used, who's going to use it, and what's going to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. So then you have to go, for example, workplaces classically will install charging, and then within a year or two, they're back ripping up pavement to install more because it feeds more people to buy chargers. Or, in Oregon, we were an early adopter. The state funded the West Coast Electric Highway along with Washington, and we put fast chargers along I-5, every 30 to 50 miles, but we only put one plug, and it was only a CHAdeMO standard. And there were a lot of good reasons at the time. That was the funding we had and so forth. But now we're having to go back and figure out, how do we retrofit that to be dual standard? How do we put in multiple plugs? And if we had been able to think a little bit more ahead and build a little more future-proofing in, we'd be much better off.
Yeah. Well, I saw a question from Larry pop up. If you could talk a little bit more about how Fourth works with public agencies in developing maybe and managing grant applications. Because one of the things I had not been aware of until really literally, folks, I'm like half a step ahead of a lot of you, and just learning about the procurement requirements and match requirements. And so how do you help public agencies figure out all those details?
Yeah, well, it's looked really different on every project, I would say. And we're still pretty nimble with 30 people. But I would say what we're best at is putting the people, the ideas, and the money together and start playing that broker role and playing the. Sometimes what you really need is the. I had a board member once who used to like to ask, "Who's the suit who owns this?" Which was sort of obnoxious. He was from venture finance. But it's kind of the right idea, right? You need somebody who's responsible for moving the project forward, who's calling and saying, okay, we need that match letter by this week. And, who's thinking creatively about how do we dig under the sofa cushions to find the funding? How do we pass the hat to say, okay, for example, there was a real specific question directly about on the last EVIP project, Fourth was listed as providing the match, which we did. Where did that come from? It was about $500,000. It was a lot of really creative sources. It was everything from, can site hosts give us a letter telling us what the value of their parking is that they're providing? Can we do some earned media where we're promoting the opening of the charging station and count the value of that? Can we host some ride and drives there using utility funding and count that or part of that? Can we get folks to donate some of the equipment at below market costs and count some of that? So really it's assembling the team, assembling the funding, putting the pieces together, and quarterbacking is probably where we add the most value. We do also actually write grant proposals. Frankly, if you do the rest of it well, I think writing the proposal is often the easy part. You can contract with a grant writer. There's people who are really good at that, but it's the design and the teaming arrangements.
I'll say, as somebody who's written a lot of grants in my day, when I think about what it would take to manage, you're right, putting the grant together. If you've got the package, putting the grant together is going to be the easy story to tell. It's how do you manage that package of project elements, partners, matches, and keep everything moving. So it's, I was, until I learned that there were entities like Fourth that do what you do, I just could not fathom how that worked. This is a good time for us to segue to the next part of the agenda where we talk about how all these pieces come together. And I see the question from Cindy Jane popping up about, how do we go about answering questions about, the future revenue generated? Who does this economic modeling, and how do we account for this? And my hunch is that this is probably something that all three of our panelists have insights on, because some part of that's going to come from what like a Fourth does, but some part of that's going to have to do with the charging equipment and that return on investment. So why don't we, as we think about how all of these pieces come together into a proposal, why don't we sort of open up with that? How do we think about, how do you guys approach the answering the questions about the economic modeling of revenue and the expenses and that cost benefit equation that is central, I think, to especially the big grant proposals?
Yeah, and I'll just quickly, and then we can hand it over to them, say that we would definitely lean on the charging providers for that. And EVIP is particularly unusual in the way that grant proposal comes together, where you really need to do the pro forma and show how much public money do you need, and at what point is it going to start paying for itself. And those are calculations that we would absolutely defer to the charging partner on a particular project, because they all have, you've heard two business models. There's others. They're all slightly different. Their economics and financials are all slightly different. And that's really, their strong suit. If it didn't come through clearly though, and again, I won't put them on the spot, but you all need to know that charging is not a shall we say, it's not a highly profitable business at this point. I think there's a lot of money being invested with the expectation that as we move to that future where all vehicles are electric and the chargers are being used more, it will be profitable. Because the key to a charger being profitable is that it's heavily used. So the interests are well aligned there. But beyond that, I will let Matt and Shannon say anything they want to say about that.
And Matt, how does Chargepoint think about this? How do you guys approach it? And then Shannon.
Yeah, I think a lot to break down there. I think Jeff's right. I mean, frankly, charging is not a profitable business on its surface, right? Like just charging for revenue and charging sessions. There are ways to recoup funding for sure. But I think that looking at things like public agencies, utilities, where there, it's maybe a benefit for the community as a whole, is important. I think that we're certainly happy to help economic modeling, right? How much does the station cost? How much is the make-ready work going to cost as far as getting a transformer, installation costs, things of that nature? And how much can the funding hopefully help cover of that? I think a few things to think about, right? So you can collect revenues on the station from ours, and maybe in the future it could be making some recurring revenue, but it's not going to be a ton. The big thing that I think we're maybe going to get into at some point is in 2023, the low carbon fuel standard. Sorry, I was trying to find the words for it. The low carbon fuel standard, right? So there's a lot that goes into that we're certainly happy to help discuss. But as a station owner, you charge kilowatt hours on a vehicle, and essentially think about it as the more kilowatt hours you charge, you send it to the state, and the state gives you back a certificate, a piece of paper that says, hey, congratulations, you charge this much. Think of it almost as a share in a company that you can then trade on an open market. And with California and Oregon having those, we've seen that be able to generate a really substantial amount of recurring revenue on those stations. So there's one model that really does help offset a lot of those costs. The other thing we see, again, bringing utilities in, where utilities have a very vested interest in adding more stations to their territory, seeing it as an infrastructure to help support electrification in their territory, and it's an asset that utilities know better than anyone how to install assets and capitalize on them. So there's a few different ways to kind of break it down, using charging revenues as one, but certainly how much match dollars we need from the state, how much is it going to cost for installation infrastructure, again, level 2, level 3, then how much can we expect to get as far as low carbon fuel credits, any other funding opportunities out there. There's the utility tax incentive that's going on right now. That is another opportunity for folks to pull a lever that helps offset some funding. So looking for all your different funding sources, bringing them all together. Is there low carbon fuel standard? Is there WSDOT funding? Is there utility funding? Are all different ways to think about it, as well as charging revenues on the station itself.
Wow, that's a lot. Shannon.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. Those were two really thorough answers. I would just, to the direct question, I am not aware of any kind of broad tools to model this out, but we are very happy to have conversations about, based on partnership structures and resources and incentives, et cetera, available, how those revenue projections might unfold. So definitely something that is very region specific, site specific to many different factors that we're happy to walk through.
And I'm seeing a question from Larry, and I think it sort of piggybacks onto this in a bit. It feels like agencies are going to need to be able to do some of this back of the envelope forecasting before they even commit to a business model or commit to pursuing infrastructure. Like how much can, let's say the Port of Allen, how should they think about the cost of the electricity for those charging units versus what they might be able to collect from people using those facilities. And this seems like this is sort of the preliminary work before a grant application, before somebody decides to pursue a grant application. They've got to think through these pieces first, right? To know that what the right business model is for them, or what the right equipment is that they need. Is this some of that preliminary work that folks should be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that all goes into what is the reason for these charging stations? You know, is it for the general public? Is it for employees and the general public? Fleet stations? There's a whole range of use cases for this. I think obviously for the WashDOT funding, it's going to be primarily for Washingtonians, you know, the general public to use. And we certainly think that if you're going to be doing all this upfront work to install a station, you should at least get the cost of electricity back, right? So you pay your electric bill, but then on the back end, you charge customers to recoup that cost, at least to offset it, if not to supersede it. But then we also have the ability, let's say you put it at City Hall, you can charge the general public, you know, 25 cents a kilowatt hour, and your employees just the cost of electricity, 10 cents a kilowatt hour. You're able to differentiate that if there's certain benefits you want to provide to employees, to the public, certain folks, maybe just citizens of your town specifically get discounted rates. Those are all things that you can consider when you're building that in. Like, again, do you want to generate revenue on this, or is it more a part of an infrastructure like we see in the chat, a bike lane or free Wi-Fi? How are you viewing this infrastructure in your territory?
Yeah. And I feel like, please.
I was just going to add that it's never too early to bring together regional stakeholders for a conversation. Grant opportunities pop up and can sometimes move very quickly. And so even if there is not a specific opportunity in mind, knowing what kinds of partnerships would best serve your infrastructure needs and your community is really important. And by regional stakeholders, I definitely mean, you know, the folks represented in this room, and also we mentioned the utilities as an important component. There's also, you know, community input on actual parking spaces to electrify, and kind of the best locations, actual parking spaces for that. So there's a variety of perspectives that are really helpful to bring together early on in the development phase.
Yeah, and I would just add 100% repeat that as a organization, nonprofit fundraiser. You never want to be chasing the money, right? You want to have a plan. You want to know what you want, so that when the funding is available that can help you get what you want, you can go after it. And those are two very different things. And the other advantage of that is, you know, if you know what you want, you can be thinking about that as you're doing other projects, right? If you're going in and you're tearing up the street to put in new street lights, you can put in street lights that also have charging, or you can put in the conduit for charging. If you're building a new city hall, you should be thinking about, how do we provide enough charging so that in 10 years, when all the cars parked there are electric, they have places to plug in. So the more you can start thinking now about that, the better.
Well, and I'm kind of curious for the folks who are on the call today. So I think a lot of you, I mean, you're here because you're interested in EV infrastructure. You've hopefully been thinking about projects. Hopefully maybe there's some partnerships starting to, you know, firm up on the sides of things. I'm curious if there's information that you feel that you need to make informed decisions about, you know, what infrastructure, where, how it fits in. I like the notion of thinking about EV, electric vehicle, electrification of the transportation system as a program and not just a project. Do you have the information you need? Are you making the connections that you need to make? I'm kind of curious from folks. We thought that there was going to be a ZEVA application process in August, and that's been delayed now till I think the end of the year. So have folks started to work on things, and do you have information needs or questions that these folks can help answer, or others, if we don't have the resources here today to find for you? I'm kind of curious from the floor here, what might be bubbling up? Anybody? I have a lot of questions, but I'm not putting together a grant application, so. I mean, oh, Ted, did you have?
Yes, you know, Tara, I love the presentation from Jeff, Matt, and Shannon, but I look at it in a very particular situation. We're running 600-700 miles a day with law enforcement, and I just wonder, you know, there are certain things when I work for a small city as a police chief. We were going to move to electric cars, that'd be fine. But when we're running for state and federal agencies, Matt, Jeff, and Shannon, do you have any expertise that can sway me away that gas is not the best thing? When we have to just run and throw 5 gallons in the tank just to get up to the call, you know, help me out, because 5 gallons takes 3 minutes. So help me out.
Well, I guess what I would say is, sorry.
No, good, Jeff, go ahead. You start off. Yeah.
Well, I would say, first of all, fleet assessment, we could have a whole nother conversation parallel to the one we've been having here, which is more about charging assessment. And you definitely want to look at the use case for the vehicles and where does it make sense to start, and, you know, what can you do with the technology that's there right now. So it's the first thing I would say. The second thing is, yeah, the more you drive a vehicle, the more sense it makes to go electric, right? Because they tend to cost a little more upfront, but the cost of operating an electric vehicle, it's like getting gas for $1 a gallon. So if you can, you want to electrify the things you use the most first. You know, specifically on police vehicles, that has been an ongoing challenge, especially the ones that do high-speed pursuit and those kinds of things. If it's somebody who's issuing parking tickets, you know, or just patrolling the city, which is a lot of what police cars do a lot of the time in a lot of places, that's one thing. I do know that the sorry, I didn't prep my mind for this, but there is the new help me out here, Matt. Is it the Ford
Mach-E?
Yeah,
Mach-E.
the Mustang Mach-E.
Yeah.
There is a police version of that they're working on, but you may know more about that than I do, Matt.
Yeah, I don't. So I think that's a good question, Ted and Jeff. You're right. I mean, there's hundreds and thousands of different use cases here, right? We can talk about, you know, fleet people, you know, parking agents, school buses, delivery, plus just the general public. So this is a specific use case of police and, you know, emergency vehicles. And honestly, just maybe this isn't the right answer that I would love to say. Don't do it unless you're comfortable doing it. I think that right now, Ford, I know the Mach-E is working on a pursuit rated EV. And I think, again, you're going to have to really consider, you know, is it more of a patrolling police officer or a pursuit one? And then do you have a vehicle that can support that? What is the battery size? What is the max speed of that vehicle? And then, you know, maybe start with one that's not a pursuit one. Start with one that's more patrol that has a smaller radius, right? So we see folks that they want to get one school bus or they want to get a delivery vehicle. They're going to get one that's, you know, that they know has a shorter radius. I'm not going to do the one that goes the furthest distance. We're going to do one that we feel comfortable, won't go more than 100 miles in a day or every other day. And I think that, you know, so long as you are aware of the constraints of the vehicle itself, that you know, it has a 400-mile range, whatever it may be, from the Mach-E. And so long as you can stay under that range and then get it back to, you know, a depot, get it back to a charging station for an overnight charge, it should be good to go by the morning. So it's not going to be the same as, you know, filling up a gas station and then, you know, continuing on your way in 3 minutes. It's going to be more of a, what is the radius of this vehicle? Can we get it back to a point where we feel comfortable charging it either overnight or to a DC fast charger to get it back up in 20, 30 minutes? But certainly, I'm not going to advise that you get a police pursuit vehicle right now that's going to be comparable to a gas station model. It's going to take time to kind of play this. So, folks, I know that Spokane, I believe, got 4 police Teslas, I want to say. So maybe a use case to consider.
Very good.
Yeah, so you're starting to see that play out and starting to see those use cases in real life. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how that process, plays out in real time. But just to be blunt, there are challenges we need to figure out with things like ambulance, with police, with real emergency rated vehicles and what their radius is. I think pursuit police vehicles is one of the challenges that I still see as we need to work on as a.
We're no longer able to pursue. It's just a long way run for a lot of the agencies to get to someplace, especially with state and federal. It's just, we have a long way to run. So it's no longer the pursuit that I'm interested in. It's just, I know the Port of Allen I got a great executive director that's has a lot of knowledge on this, and we're working on it. But it's just, I wish with the Port of Allen we had a little bit more support. So we're trying to get it done, and who we go through, we'll go through. So
I'm going to jump in here just in light of the time, and I know that we're coming up on 11:30, and I'll leave the room open if people want to keep talking afterwards, but I want to make sure for those who need to get off. It sounds almost like we could have a forum talking about the public sector side, like public fleet side of things, and maybe that would be of value in the future. But I want to make sure we hit on, I just want to give any last minute updates on funding. What I know of is that ZVIP, they're still hiring a grant manager. So that program that we thought would come in August, we're now hoping will come before the end of the year. So this does create a window of opportunity to do some of this work that we're sort of talking about here of pre-positioning and being ready, but there are several opportunities coming right after that. There's the Electrification of Transportation Systems grants, ETS2, funded through the Clean Energy Fund by the Department of Commerce. We expect that to be announced in early 22. We're also expecting sometime, I think early 2022, for Department of Ecology to do another VW settlement grant award process. And I think we were expecting to have heard something by now about WashDOT's green transit. Nothing, I haven't heard anything confirmed though, but with the new biennium budget in place, we're hoping to hear something on that in early 2022 as well. So I don't know if there are any other funding opportunities or updates that people know about to share before we sort of formally end the meeting. But if not, I will, just to reiterate, I am going to, oh, Susan, hi.
Sorry, I just want to say that we need to make sure that we're looking at a broader perspective, because it might not just be transportation grants. Maybe we can look at economic development and tourism grants for things like corridors. Port Townsend to Coopville, for instance, getting charging stations on both sides could be a tourism economic development effort. There's lots of other opportunities out there that we shouldn't just focus narrowly on transportation grants.
That's a really good point. And I'm going to say something I quite haven't thought through what the implications of it might be, but I'll say that if people are interested in forming any sort of work groups around that, looking at other funding opportunities or bouncing some ideas like, with others who are interested in trying to look for some of these alternative funding sources. I think the Bonneville Environmental Foundation has grants available for certain things. If you drop your information and your interest in the chat box, I'll see about helping people connect afterwards to take a look at some of those other opportunities. I want to be, again, mindful of our agenda. So we're at 11:30. I want to thank Shannon, Matt, and Jeff for taking time out this morning to help us understand a little bit better these different perspectives. And we'll formally close the meeting, but like I said, I will leave this room open for anybody who wants to hang out and continue talking and ask more questions of of these folks. I see some interesting things in the chat box, and so I want to leave this opportunity open as long as possible, but the meeting is officially over at this point. So thank you very much for attending today, and I'll get information out to everybody as soon as I can, hopefully by the end of this week. Thanks.